To our wonderful viewers at Cheating Hour, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. If you like stories like this, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss out on our next exciting story. We'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know now in the comments. And if you've ever been through something like this, share your experience in the comments. Daniel Rourke stood outside the courthouse in San Diego, his jaw clenched and the desert sun bouncing off his aviator sunglasses. A former Marine Corps logistics officer, Daniel had spent most of his adult life dealing with chaos in war zones, not family courtrooms. He was 42, solidly built, and carried himself with a calm authority that never had to announce itself. His uniform had been traded for tailored dress shirts and slacks, but the discipline never left him. He now worked as a security consultant for Fortune 500 firms, designing response plans for disasters most people never imagined. His wife, Vanessa, was the complete opposite in every way. Elegant, sociable, and magnetic, Vanessa was the kind of woman who could command attention without speaking. She had once been a high-end real estate agent in La Jolla, the kind who sold 8-figure homes to clients who rarely asked for the price. They had met at a fundraiser organized by a mutual friend, a congressman Daniel had advised on cyber resilience. Vanessa was poised, graceful, and intelligent, the kind of woman who seemed to belong on the arm of a man with influence. Their marriage, for the first few years, was enviable. Daniel had taken a contract in Dubai, overseeing private security for oil executives, and Vanessa had stayed in California, managing her firm and renovating the hilltop home they bought after the wedding. When their daughter Grace was born 7 years ago, Daniel took a permanent domestic assignment to be closer to home. He built his own firm. She cut down on work to focus on Grace. Everything seemed ideal. But over the past 2 years, Daniel had begun to feel the subtle chill in their marriage. Vanessa became more distant, her smiles tighter, her conversations shorter. She had started going to networking mixers more frequently, sometimes returning home tipsy, sometimes staying overnight with vague explanations about late business meetings or traffic. Daniel never accused. He asked questions calmly, once. When he got no answers, he began watching. It wasn't suspicion that drove him. It was pattern recognition. He had trained for it. Subtle shifts in behavior, gaps in stories, routine changes that didn't match prior baselines. Vanessa had changed, and not in ways he could write off to stress or motherhood. Grace, their daughter, was a quiet, observant child. She clung more to Daniel now. When Vanessa was home, she often kept to herself in her room or asked to visit Daniel at his office downtown. That was the first red flag that truly mattered to him. Daniel never raised his voice. He didn't argue. But he started collecting data. GPS logs from the car he paid for. Email headers from the shared cloud account she had forgotten about. Voice messages she hadn't deleted from her synced phone. Her tone had shifted in those, even with him. Cold. Detached. The night things truly turned began when Grace had a fever. Vanessa was at another listing dinner, unreachable. Daniel had to leave a strategy call with a firm in London to pick Grace up from school. She was burning up, trembling. He rushed her to urgent care and held her through the night. Vanessa didn't come home until 9 a.m. Her excuse? Her phone died. Daniel didn't argue. He just nodded and took note. The next week, Vanessa blindsided him. A court summons arrived via courier. She had filed for emergency custody and a restraining order, claiming Daniel was emotionally unstable and had exhibited controlling, dangerous behavior. She painted him as an ex-Marine with PTSD, prone to angry outbursts. The documents referenced arguments he never recalled, threats he never made, and incidents that sounded more like rehearsed fiction than reality. He could have exploded. Instead, he went still. The court date was set 2 weeks out. In that time, Daniel moved out voluntarily, staying in a short-term rental across town. He spoke only through legal channels. Vanessa refused to let him see Grace, citing the emergency order. He didn't push, he gathered. Every conversation they had was already archived. Their home security system, the one he had installed himself, backed up audio and video to an off-site encrypted server. Vanessa had no idea. There was a record of every dinner, every argument, every bedtime story with Grace. The voice that came through most often was calm, measured, and his. Her lawyer, a slick man named Jeffrey Klein, had already begun posturing in the media. Vanessa claimed Daniel had slammed a wall during an argument, that he frightened Grace. Daniel knew the exact date she referenced. He pulled the footage. No raised voices. Just Vanessa berating him for canceling a trip to New York and him standing quietly, arms folded, before excusing himself to walk the dog. He assembled everything: transcripts, audio clips, screenshots. He hired a digital forensics firm to certify the recordings. His attorney, a former federal prosecutor named Marcus Ellison, said little when he received the package. Just a quiet, "We'll let her speak first." The morning of the hearing, Daniel stood in front of the mirror and adjusted his navy tie. He had slept barely 3 hours but looked composed. When he walked into the courtroom, Vanessa avoided his gaze. She wore a pale blue dress, tailored to suggest vulnerability. Jeffrey did most of the talking. "Your Honor," he said with a solemn tone, "Ms. Rourke is deeply afraid for her safety and the safety of her daughter. Mr. Rourke has displayed patterns of psychological manipulation, verbal threats, and isolation tactics common to emotional abusers." Daniel remained stone-faced. "She is requesting full temporary custody," Klein continued, "and a protective order barring all contact until Mr. Rourke can undergo psychological evaluation." The judge, a woman in her 60s with salt and pepper hair and a tired expression, nodded slowly. "Mr. Rourke, your response." Marcus stood. "Your Honor, we request that before any ruling is made, you allow us to enter audio evidence for the record, certified by a third-party digital forensics lab. It directly contradicts the incidents Ms. Rourke has cited." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." Marcus turned to the court clerk, who pressed play on a laptop wired to the speaker system. The audio began. Vanessa's voice filled the room. "No, you don't get to cancel my trip just because you're jealous." Daniel's voice followed, even, quiet. "I'm not canceling anything. I'm saying Grace is sick and needs at least one of us here." "Then you stay. You're the boring one anyway." A sharp intake of breath. Vanessa again. "You think you're so perfect. Like I should bow down because you were in the military. You're nothing here. This is my world." The judge blinked. Marcus tapped the spacebar. Another clip. Vanessa. "You don't scare me, Daniel. Not even when you're standing there like some kind of robot. Go ahead, document this. You always do." Daniel. "I'm documenting it so Grace can have the truth later." Vanessa, laughing. "Good luck with that. Judges believe mothers." By the third clip, Vanessa's expression had gone tight. Jeffrey shifted uncomfortably. The judge finally held up a hand. "I've heard enough for now. We will recess for 30 minutes. I want both parties' counsel in chambers." Daniel stood and adjusted his cuffs. Vanessa didn't meet his eyes, but Jeffrey's face had drained of color, like a man who realized the script he had memorized was written in disappearing ink. The war hadn't ended, but the battlefield had just shifted. The door to the judge's chambers closed behind them with a muffled click. Inside, the atmosphere was sterile and silent, broken only by the shifting of papers and the hum of the overhead fluorescent light. Judge Miriam Calderon folded her hands, gaze settling on Vanessa first. "Mrs. Rourke, did you knowingly provide false testimony in your petition for emergency custody?" Vanessa opened her mouth, but no sound came. Jeffrey Klein, who had just minutes earlier spoken with confident authority, stepped forward. "Your Honor, we respectfully ask that we be given time to review the recordings and assess their context. It's possible there's an explanation for the apparent discrepancies." "You can review all you want," the judge replied flatly. "But from what I heard, your client lied under oath about multiple events and made serious accusations that are contradicted by clear, authenticated recordings. This court does not take kindly to that." Daniel stood beside Marcus, arms crossed. His posture was relaxed, but inside he was measuring every second. He'd been in rooms like this overseas, where men lied through their teeth and lives depended on catching the smallest inconsistency. "We will resume in 40 minutes, Judge Calderon said. "I strongly suggest you advise your client on the implications of perjury." Back in the waiting area, Daniel watched Vanessa pace. Jeffrey was whispering to her fiercely, his hands slicing the air in frustration. Vanessa's confident, elegant composure had shattered. Her heels clicked erratically across the floor, her eyes darting to the doors, the cameras, even him. She looked at him once, a flicker of pleading, then fear, then anger. He didn't look away. Marcus nudged him. We may not need to go back in. I think they'll fold. Not yet, Daniel said. She always bets that people won't follow through, that they'll walk away to avoid the mess. We finish this. When court resumed, Vanessa didn't speak. Jeffrey did. Your Honor, my client would like to withdraw her emergency petition and amend the custody request to joint terms. Judge Calderon raised an eyebrow. On what grounds? She acknowledges that certain emotional statements may have been exaggerated under stress. She wishes to move forward with a less adversarial approach for the sake of the child. Daniel remained still. Marcus stood. We reject the amendment. Mr. Rourke is now requesting full temporary custody until a formal hearing can be set. We also ask for court-mandated psychological evaluation for Mrs. Rourke, supervised visitation, and a full review of her testimony for perjury. Vanessa turned sharply toward him. Her lips parted in disbelief. You can't do that. Judge Calderon didn't flinch. He can. And given what I've heard today, I'm inclined to approve it. Daniel had no joy in watching her flinch, but he had something else: resolution. For 2 years he had tried to reason with a woman who weaponized narrative, who had twisted his steadiness into emotional distance, his silence into guilt. Now, the clarity he fought for was finally under a light too bright to deny. After court, he drove directly to the school. Grace was in art class when the administrator brought her out, confused but smiling when she saw him. Daniel knelt down, arms open. She ran into them, burying her face in his chest. Daddy, are you home again? He nodded, his voice steady. Yeah, baby, I'm home. He took her to the condo he had rented. It was smaller, less ornate than their house in La Jolla, but clean and peaceful. He let her choose dinner, mac and cheese. They sat on the couch watching cartoons, Grace wrapped in a fuzzy blanket, Daniel beside her in jeans and a t-shirt, the courthouse a distant planet. Marcus called around 9. She won't fight the custody ruling. Her lawyers already floated the idea of settling everything quietly. No, Daniel replied. We don't settle. She doesn't get to set terms. She dragged me through mud with lies and used Grace as leverage. I want a full custody hearing, and I want the perjury charges filed. There was a pause. You sure? Yes. The next week passed in a blur of logistics and school drop-offs. Grace adjusted faster than he expected. She was sleeping through the night again, drawing more. Vanessa texted twice, short and cold, once asking to talk, once asking to see Grace. Daniel replied through Marcus. All communication goes through counsel. Supervised visitation may be available after court order. Vanessa didn't push. The media interest simmered just beneath the surface. Jeffrey Klein, clearly eager to avoid a reputation-staining courtroom humiliation, issued a quiet statement to the press that his client would be making no further comments and wished to resolve the matter amicably. Daniel didn't care. He hadn't built his life on public opinion. He met with his own therapist that Friday. Not court-mandated. Voluntary. Dr. Rena Chow, a Navy vet herself, listened more than she spoke. Daniel recounted everything, not with bitterness, but with surgical clarity. How Vanessa had grown cold, how he tried to talk to her, how he began to see the patterns. Why didn't you confront her sooner, she asked. Because confrontation wasn't going to change her. It would just escalate things. She needed to reveal herself. And how do you feel now that she has? Tired, but clear. Daniel didn't drink, didn't lash out. He exercised more, reorganized his consulting work to spend afternoons at home. Grace had started smiling again. That was all the proof he needed. 3 weeks later, the full custody hearing began. Vanessa looked different this time, pulled back, pale, her new lawyer far less theatrical. Her claims were subdued now, no more dramatic accusations, just requests for shared time. Daniel let Marcus handle the courtroom words, but when it came time to testify, he was methodical, calm. He described the timeline, the inconsistencies, the recordings, the impact on Grace. When asked what he wanted, he said it plainly. I want my daughter safe. I want the lies to stop. I want the court to see that when someone weaponizes the law, they endanger everyone it's meant to protect. The judge ruled in his favor. Full custody, pending review, supervised visits for Vanessa, a perjury investigation opened. After court, Daniel walked out into the sunlight holding Grace's hand. Reporters were waiting, but he said nothing, just one glance toward the cameras and a firm nod. Not for them. For himself. Back at home, Grace curled up in his lap with her drawing pad. "Can we go back to the big house soon?" she asked. He kissed her forehead. "Not yet. Maybe someday. But this place is our home now. For real." He wasn't angry anymore. The battle had ended not with shouting, but with truth, with patience, with preparation. And when the time came to act, he did it like everything else in his life, precisely, calmly, and without apology. Vanessa had gambled on a lie, but Daniel had brought the receipts. And when the judge heard the truth, it was her lawyer who turned white. He didn't need revenge, he had peace. And for the first time in years, that was more than enough. The days after the custody ruling brought a quiet rhythm to Daniel's life that he hadn't felt in years. Grace began sleeping more soundly. Her appetite returned, and she started talking about school with a kind of casual joy that hadn't been there for months. Her drawings, once abstract and fragmented, now showed houses, trees, her dad, and once, shyly, a picture of the two of them on a beach under a setting sun. Daniel filed it away in a drawer where he kept the things that mattered. Not evidence, just memories. Supervised visits began 2 weeks after the ruling. Vanessa was late to the first one. The visitation center, tucked into an office building near the courthouse, had small rooms with toys, soft chairs, and cameras in every corner. Grace hesitated when Vanessa entered. Daniel observed from the windowed hallway as Vanessa knelt and tried to embrace her. Grace didn't move. "Hey, baby," Vanessa said, trying to smile. "Why did you lie about Daddy?" Grace asked. Vanessa froze. Daniel watched her blink twice. Then she laughed, a brittle, airy sound. "Sweetheart, sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, but I'm here now." Grace looked down and began to color. Vanessa sat across from her, hands on her lap. She didn't try again. That was the first visit. The others weren't much different. She brought toys Grace didn't touch, stories Grace didn't believe. And each time when the clock hit the hour mark, Grace walked out without looking back. Daniel kept things steady. Work stayed manageable. His clients understood he was transitioning, and many offered him flexibility. His firm had grown to 6 full-time staff, and he assigned more fieldwork to them. He focused on home, on rebuilding. Still, there were things he couldn't ignore. One night, while reviewing legal files with Marcus, he found something odd. A line item in the financial disclosure Vanessa had submitted. A private bank transfer to a man named Russell Nash, listed as a consultant. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That name mean anything to you?" Daniel shook his head. "Not a friend, not family." A quick investigation through a background search lit up several red flags. Russell Nash had no legitimate business presence. He had a record in Nevada for fraud and had changed his name 2 years prior. What stood out most, though, was an apartment lease, funded by Vanessa 6 months ago. Daniel stared at the screen. It wasn't just an affair. She'd moved money, rerouted assets, built a side life in the shadows. Marcus leaned back. "You want to pursue it?" Daniel nodded. "I want to know everything." Quietly. Within a week, they had photos. Vanessa entering the apartment building, Russell opening the door, and something else. One of the luxury watches Daniel thought had been stolen during a supposed home burglary a year ago, on Russell's wrist. He didn't feel anger, just a kind of cold clarity. She had been planning an exit, possibly more. That burglary had never made sense, no signs of forced entry. Vanessa insisted it must have been a contractor. Daniel had filed an insurance claim and moved on. Now he knew. She had lied, even about theft. Marcus helped him file a report with the police, quietly, through a contact. They added the new information to the perjury case already pending. The DA's office showed interest, especially when Daniel shared the insurance records and the photos. Meanwhile, Vanessa began calling. Not often, but enough. Messages filtered through Marcus. "She wants to meet," Marcus told him one afternoon. "No. She says it's about closure. There's no such thing for people like her." Daniel had seen it in the field. Narcissists who only showed remorse when caught, who confused exposure with unfairness. Vanessa didn't want closure. She wanted control, re-entry. He wouldn't allow it. Grace asked about her less and less. Once, during a school project about families, she drew a picture of her dad, her school, and a dog she hoped to get. No mom. Daniel didn't correct her. He just asked about the dog. The case against Vanessa moved forward. Her lawyer changed again. The second one withdrew quietly after receiving the compiled evidence. The third was a public defender. Her real estate license was suspended pending investigation. Then came the day Daniel didn't expect. A subpoena arrived for a formal deposition. Not for him, for Grace. He called Marcus immediately. "They're trying to pull her into this?" Marcus sighed. "Standard move when one side's desperate. But it won't hold. We'll fight it." They did. The judge ruled Grace's testimony inadmissible due to her age and the trauma risk. But the attempt left a mark. Daniel sat Grace down that night. "Some people are saying things that aren't true, and sometimes they try to make others talk about it." She looked up from her stuffed bear. "Do I have to?" "No, not ever. I'll protect you." She nodded. "I know." And somehow, that hit harder than anything Vanessa had done. Weeks passed. Vanessa didn't attend the final hearing. Her lawyer submitted a no-contest plea. The court granted Daniel full legal and physical custody. Vanessa's visitation rights were suspended indefinitely pending a psychological evaluation she never completed. The perjury case remained open. The fraud investigation advanced. The DA had enough to indict. But Daniel requested something unexpected. Through Marcus, he asked that they hold off, not drop the charges, just wait. "She'll implode on her own," he said. "Just make sure she can't take anyone else with her." Grace thrived. Daniel enrolled her in art classes. They started weekend hikes. He got a dog, a golden retriever she named Comet. The house grew warmer, not because of luxury, because of peace. Vanessa sent one final message, not through court, a letter, handwritten, delivered by courier. Daniel opened it on the patio, Comet curled by his feet. "Daniel, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a reply. I lost everything and I know it's my fault. I wish I could undo what I did. Not for me, for Grace. I hope someday she'll want to see me. I hope you tell her I loved her, even if I failed at everything else." V. He read it once, folded it, placed it in the safe where he kept Grace's drawings. He'd decide later whether to show her. Not now. Maybe when she asked. Maybe never. The sun was setting. The air was cool. Daniel looked out over the small yard he had worked on slowly. New grass, some flowers, a bench where he read sometimes. He wasn't chasing justice anymore. He wasn't looking back. He had done what needed to be done, not out of rage, but resolve, not to destroy, but to protect. Vanessa had tried to paint him as dangerous, and the truth had exposed her. There was no need for vengeance, just clarity. And Daniel Rourke had delivered it without raising his voice. He stood, called to Comet, and walked back inside, where Grace was waiting to read him the story she'd written that day. She called it Our New House. Daniel didn't return to the La Jolla house. It sat on a bluff with ocean views and echoing rooms, now tied up in legal proceedings for asset division. His attorney advised him to fight for it, but Daniel declined. That house had been a stage, every surface curated, every corner staged for guests, social media, or showings. It had never felt like home. The small two-bedroom in North Park, modest and full of light, did. He and Grace planted a tomato garden out back. She named the plants. He showed her how to track the sun and water them properly. There was no marble kitchen, but there were pancakes every Saturday morning and laughter. The investigations into Vanessa's conduct continued to unfold. The insurance company opened its own case, now armed with photographs, call logs, and the police report Daniel had filed quietly. Vanessa was issued a notice of intent to prosecute for fraud. The total damages claimed, between the false theft and the undisclosed assets, crossed into felony territory. Still, Daniel made no moves to pursue her beyond the system's natural course. The process was already in motion, and that was enough. He didn't want to keep living in the story she'd tried to write. Grace asked fewer questions about her mother. When they came, they were practical. "Why did she say you were scary?" Daniel answered as plainly as he could. "Sometimes when people feel small, they try to make others look smaller. It doesn't mean it's true." She nodded. It seemed to satisfy her. One night she asked, "Was Mommy ever nice?" Daniel paused. "Yes," he said. "She just forgot how to stay that way." Daniel had started volunteering with a local veterans group. They held weekly meetings for dads navigating custody battles. therapy groups for combat vets dealing with domestic reintegration, and pro bono legal clinics. He didn't share his full story, he just listened. But word got around. A few men pulled him aside after one meeting. They had wives or partners who'd twisted narratives, who'd used the court system like a weapon. Daniel gave them two pieces of advice: document everything, and never lose your calm. Grace turned 8 that spring. They had a picnic at the park. Comet chased butterflies. A few neighborhood kids came. Daniel grilled hot dogs and set up a tent for shade. He watched her run and laugh and fall into the grass. She wasn't carrying weight anymore. That was how he measured healing. Vanessa was indicted formally 2 months later. She was arrested at a rental property in Palm Springs. Daniel found out through the DA's office. She was charged with 2 counts of felony insurance fraud and 1 count of perjury. Her mugshot was quiet, hollow-eyed. He didn't feel triumph, just a strange kind of silence. Marcus called that night. She's going to plea. Avoid jail time, probably probation and fines. Daniel expected that. I don't need more. They're asking if you want to make a victim impact statement. He thought about that, spoke with Grace, then decided. In court, he wore a gray suit and no tie, calm, clear. He didn't look at Vanessa, sitting with her new lawyer. Instead, he addressed the judge. I'm not here to ask for punishment. I'm here to ask for clarity, for my daughter, and for others who might go through this. When someone weaponizes systems meant to protect families, they don't just hurt one person, they damage trust in the entire process. That damage is hard to measure, but it's real. I don't hate her, I just want her to stop hurting people. The judge nodded. Vanessa's plea was accepted. No jail, restitution, probation, community service. She didn't look at Daniel as she exited the courtroom. Outside, reporters asked him for a comment. He said nothing, just walked to his car, opened the door for Grace, and drove home. He never blocked Vanessa's number. He didn't have to. She didn't call again. Once a card arrived in the mail, a child's birthday card with a note inside, unsigned. He read it, then tucked it in the same safe as her last letter. Grace didn't ask about it. She was busy building a Lego set. Daniel watched her fit pieces together with the same care he used to plan missions. Focused, intentional, whole. By summer, their world was quiet again. The garden grew. The dog settled into his place on the couch. Grace learned to ride a bike. Daniel returned to work full-time, managing his firm while still being home for dinner. The past wasn't erased, but it didn't own them. One evening, Grace brought home an assignment titled My Hero. She handed it to Daniel, embarrassed. It said, "My hero is my dad. He never yells. He always keeps me safe. Even when things were hard, he smiled for me. I want to be strong like him when I grow up." Daniel didn't cry, but he folded the paper carefully and placed it beside the first drawing she'd made in the new house. Vanessa existed only in memory now, in the shadows between chapters. She had tried to burn the life they'd built, but Daniel had planted something new from the ashes, and it grew, quietly, steadily, without apology, because strength wasn't loud. It was persistent. It showed up. It didn't need revenge. It just needed truth. And Daniel Rourke had told the truth, all the way to the end. Daniel sat on the porch, watching the last light of the day melt into the horizon. Grace was asleep inside, and Comet lay at his feet, ears flicking occasionally at the sound of distant cars. It had been nearly a year since that day in court. A year since Vanessa had stood before a judge and offered a quiet, unconvincing plea. A year since Daniel had chosen to speak not for vengeance, but for peace. In that year, everything that mattered had grown stronger. His bond with Grace, the calmness in their home, even the rhythm of his own thoughts. Where once there had been unease, constant scanning for what might go wrong, where she might strike next, there was now quiet, predictable days, a life that no longer lurched between damage control and endurance. He didn't follow news about Vanessa. He hadn't asked for updates from Marcus or the DA's office in months. The terms of her probation were clear. She wasn't to contact him or Grace directly. Restitution payments arrived irregularly, tracked only by his accountant. He didn't touch the money. It sat in a separate account he hadn't named. Occasionally, though, the past still knocked. A school counselor once asked about Vanessa after Grace mentioned in a class discussion that she only lived with her dad. Daniel had taken the meeting calmly. He explained the custody arrangement, the sealed records, the court orders. The counselor nodded, a little wide-eyed. Grace is doing really well. She's one of the most empathetic kids we have. Daniel had smiled at that. Grace had learned kindness, not from ease, but from clarity. She understood pain because she had seen it, and she had seen someone stay steady through it. Daniel's firm had grown. He now had 12 employees, a steady stream of clients, and 2 contracts with state-level agencies. He'd been invited to speak at a private security conference in D.C., but he declined. Too far, too long. Grace had a piano recital that weekend. She was learning Chopin. And though she missed a few notes when she practiced, she always corrected herself without prompting. That, Daniel thought, was the best reflection of the home they'd built. One afternoon in June, Marcus called him. "You got a moment?" Daniel stepped outside to take it. "What's up?" "She's petitioned to have her visitation rights reviewed. Claims she's completed therapy, community service, and met all the terms of her probation." Daniel said nothing for a moment. The breeze picked up. "Is it credible?" "Barely. The therapist she used is real but questionable. Reports are vague. The DA's office is skeptical, but she has the right to file." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Then we respond." He didn't tell Grace, not yet. There was no need to burden her with what might never happen. Instead, he reviewed the reports Marcus sent over. Vanessa had been attending bi-weekly therapy sessions for 6 months. The therapist's notes were filled with language that sounded more like rehearsal than reflection. Patient shows increased insight into prior decisions. Patient expresses remorse for harm caused. Not once did the notes mention Grace by name. Not once did Vanessa express curiosity about her daughter's well-being during their year apart. It was all about process, about ticking boxes. The court hearing was set for August. Marcus filed a formal objection, backed by Grace's ongoing therapy notes, letters from her teachers, and a statement from her school counselor. Daniel wrote a letter himself, short and clear. She has not shown that she can prioritize her daughter's needs over her own reputation. This is not about visitation. It's about integrity, and the absence of it. The judge called for a review hearing, closed session, no press. Vanessa appeared in a slate gray pantsuit, less polished than before, but still rehearsed. Daniel wore a simple navy jacket, no tie. Marcus spoke first. Vanessa's lawyer followed, then Vanessa herself. "I made mistakes," she said. "I lost my family. I've worked hard to understand why I made those choices. I'm not asking for full custody, just the chance to see my daughter again, to show her that I've changed." Daniel didn't speak unless asked. When he kept it direct. "Your Honor, character is not what we say about ourselves when we want something. It's what we do when no one is looking. In the time since this court gave me full custody, Grace has flourished. She has stability, trust, and a sense of safety. Reintroducing uncertainty into that, not because Grace asked, but because Vanessa demands it, would undermine everything she's rebuilt." The judge deliberated for 4 weeks. When the ruling arrived, Daniel opened it alone. Vanessa's petition was denied. The court recommended no review for a minimum of 3 years, contingent on independent evaluation and demonstrable improvement. Daniel didn't celebrate. He didn't even tell Marcus right away. He just made Grace pancakes the next morning and helped her pack for summer camp. That weekend, while she was away, he found himself at the beach, the same spot where he and Vanessa had once posed for a holiday photo. He walked the sand alone, letting the waves dull the edges of his thoughts. There were no flashbacks, no tension, just memory and distance. On his way home, he stopped at a bookstore and bought Grace a blank sketchbook, one with a leather cover and thick pages. He wrote her a note inside the front cover. "This is for the stories you'll write yourself. I'll always read them." She returned from camp sunburned and full of stories about kayaking and s'mores. She barely touched the sketchbook the first week. Then one night, after dinner, she brought it to him, the first 2 pages filled. It was a story about a tree that had been hit by lightning. Everyone thought it had died, but over time it grew again. New branches, stronger roots. She titled it Still Standing. Daniel smiled. "I love it." "Is it sad?" she asked. "No," he said. "It's real." They didn't talk about Vanessa. Not because it was taboo, but because it wasn't necessary. The past had its place, and its place wasn't here. A 1.5 years later, Daniel stood in the audience at Grace's school play. She had the lead role, a small-town mayor trying to save a library. She wore a blazer 2 sizes too big and spoke her lines with perfect clarity. The audience laughed in all the right places. When she took her bow, she scanned the crowd until she found him. He gave her a thumbs up. She beamed. After the show, she hugged him hard. "Did I do okay?" "You did perfect. Can we get ice cream?" He grinned. Lead actresses always get ice cream. They walked together under the streetlights, Comet trotting beside them. He realized in that moment that the fear was gone. The fear of what would be said, what would be stolen, what might collapse. Vanessa had tried to rewrite reality, but Daniel had never let her hold the pen. Now, it belonged to Grace, and she was writing something beautiful. The autumn that followed brought with it a sense of momentum. Grace had started 4th grade, and her confidence showed in the smallest ways. The way she corrected the microwave clock when it blinked wrong, the way she laid out her clothes the night before school, the way she insisted on packing her own lunch. Daniel watched from the background, offering help when needed but never stepping in too quickly. He had learned, slowly, to make space for her to grow. Their lives had found rhythm. Breakfast was quiet and warm, school drop-offs marked with inside jokes and radio sing-alongs. In the evenings, Daniel helped with homework while Comet lay at their feet. Grace had started keeping a journal, a habit Daniel encouraged without ever asking to read it. That was her space, just as he had his books and porch and quiet. One Saturday morning, Daniel received a letter. No courier this time. It came in a plain envelope, addressed in Vanessa's handwriting. He hesitated before opening it. Inside was a formal document, a notice of intent to relocate. Vanessa was moving out of state. Oregon. The letter explained that she had completed her probation, was taking a job offer at a real estate firm in Portland, and intended to start fresh. There was no request to see Grace, no accusations, no demands. At the bottom, in her familiar cursive, "I know it doesn't matter now, but I'm sorry for all of it. I hope you're both well. I won't reach out again. V." Daniel read it twice, then folded it, placed it in a folder, and filed it away. He felt no heat in his chest, no turmoil, just the quiet understanding that some chapters, when left behind, do not need to be reread. He made no mention of it to Grace. That winter, Grace caught the flu. It wasn't serious, but it was enough to keep her home for a week. Daniel took time off, set up her favorite movies, made broth from scratch. One afternoon, as she lay half asleep on the couch, she asked a question he hadn't expected. "Do you think she remembers me?" He didn't need to ask who. "Yes," he said. "I think she does." Grace was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I forget her voice." Daniel didn't flinch. "That's okay. You don't have to hold on to things that hurt." She nodded, then reached for his hand. "I'm glad it's just us." That evening, he sat at the dining table with a mug of tea while Grace drew beside him. He glanced at her page. A tree, tall and full, roots thick and grounded. In the branches were names, friends, her teacher, Comet, and his name at the base. "What's the tree for?" he asked. "Family tree, but not like the one at school. This one's for who I choose." Daniel swallowed the knot in his throat. "It's a good one." She nodded. "I can add more later, if I want." Winter passed into spring, and Daniel began teaching Grace how to ride the city bus. Not out of necessity, but out of principle. He wanted her to know how to move in the world, to be self-reliant. One Saturday, they took the bus downtown, visited a used bookstore, and had lunch at a small diner tucked between office buildings. Grace asked questions about his childhood, about the Marines, about the places he'd seen. He gave her the versions she needed, honest, but not heavy. Her eyes lit up when he told her about training in Okinawa. "That's a real place?" she asked. He smiled. "It is. Maybe one day I'll take you." In May, Daniel received another letter, this one from the court. The perjury and fraud case against Vanessa was officially closed. The restitution payments had been completed. Her record, while not expunged, was marked as settled. There were no further legal ties between them. Daniel informed Marcus, who confirmed the same. "She's out of the system, more or less. Probably rebuilding, staying quiet. You want to follow up?" Daniel shook his head. "I don't need to know, as long as she stays away." Grace had started asking more about his work. Not out of suspicion, but curiosity. She wanted to know what a security consultant did. So he showed her. Blueprints of buildings, response flowcharts, crisis simulations. She listened carefully, occasionally offering suggestions that made him pause. "You think like someone who solves problems," he told her. She grinned. "Like you." That summer, they took their first trip outside the state together, a road trip up the coast. Grace kept a disposable camera. Daniel kept a small journal. They stopped at roadside attractions, hiked small trails, ate too much ice cream. At a beach in Northern California, Grace stood on a rock, arms out, wind pulling at her hair. "Take the picture now," she shouted. He did. Later, in the motel room, she handed him the journal. "You should write about today, so we don't forget." He wrote, "She stood in the wind and didn't flinch, just opened her arms and smiled. That's what strength looks like now." In August, Daniel was invited to speak at a state panel on family court reform. He was reluctant at first, but Grace encouraged him. "You always say we should tell the truth. Maybe it helps someone." So he spoke, not about revenge, not about loss, but about resilience, about the danger of false narratives, the importance of evidence, and the quiet strength it takes to stay measured in the face of betrayal. His words were quoted in a local article the next day. "Justice isn't loud, it's consistent." Back home, Grace had clipped the article and stuck it on the fridge. One night, as summer wound down, Daniel sat on the porch again, Comet by his feet. Grace came out, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Do you think people always change?" He thought for a moment. "Not always, but some do, especially when they choose to." "Do you think she did?" "Maybe, but what matters more is that we did." Grace nodded slowly. "I like who we are." He smiled. "Me too." The stars were bright that night, the kind of sky that made silence feel like music. Daniel leaned back, Grace resting her head on his shoulder, and they watched in content stillness. Vanessa had once tried to redefine who he was, a dangerous man, unstable, unfit. But time and truth had erased her story, not through retaliation, through presence, through proving, day after day, that who he was would speak louder than anything she had claimed. And now, the only voices that mattered were the ones beside him. The rest, gone like footprints in the tide. Daniel had never marked time the way most people did. Birthdays passed quietly. Holidays were observed without fanfare. But every September, as summer folded into cooler nights and the golden hour stretched longer, he felt a kind of internal reset. Not dramatic, just a soft recalibration, a look back, a breath forward. This September marked 2 years since the custody hearing. He hadn't kept a calendar, hadn't circled dates. But the body remembers. The heart remembers. And when he stood at the window one morning watching Grace tie her shoes without help before school, he felt the weight of time and how far they had come from that courtroom. Grace was 10 now. Her world had expanded. She had friends she trusted, a bike route she knew by heart, and a room full of books and drawings and quiet dreams. Daniel had let her paint her walls pale green and hang glow-in-the-dark stars from the ceiling. She called it her forest sky. It was her space, just as the backyard garden was his. Tomatoes had given way to peppers and lavender. He tended it at dusk, the way he used to oil his rifle, with respect, with attention, with presence. That month, he got a call from a local nonprofit that worked with families navigating high-conflict custody cases. They were starting a mentorship initiative and asked if he'd participate. Daniel hesitated, not because he doubted the mission, but because stepping back into those waters meant revisiting places he had sealed. He told Grace about it over dinner. "They want me to talk to other parents going through hard times, like we did." She chewed thoughtfully. "Would it help them?" "Maybe, if I do it right." She nodded. "Then you should. Just don't make it too sad." He agreed. The first session was at a community center downtown. 5 parents, all strangers, 2 mothers, 3 fathers. Each had a story that crackled with tension. Forged documents, false accusations, silent systems that didn't know how to differentiate truth from performance. Daniel didn't give them legal advice. He gave them habits. Document everything. Speak carefully. Don't match chaos with chaos. One father approached him afterward, shaken. I thought I was the only one. I thought maybe I was crazy. You're not, Daniel said. But the system will make you feel that way if you let it. Don't let it. He left that night quieter than usual. Grace noticed. You okay? Just thinking. About before? A little. She reached over and turned on the small lamp in the hallway, their agreed-upon signal that the day could now rest. He smiled. Thanks. In November, Grace brought home an assignment, a family history interview. Can I ask you questions about when you were little? Of course. She asked about his childhood, his parents, his first bike, his favorite toy. Then she paused. Do you want me to write about Mom? Daniel looked at her carefully. Only if you want to. She shrugged. I don't know what I'd write. It doesn't feel like history, just something that stopped. That's okay. Not everything has to be written down. She seemed relieved, then added a sentence to her paper. My family is small, but everything in it is real. Daniel watched her pen the words slowly. It felt like closure, though no one said it. In December, Marcus called with an update, not about Vanessa, but about a new court decision passed in California. False accusations in family court were now subject to review and penalties beyond the case itself. Daniel had testified in support of the bill the year prior, but never expected it to pass. Your story helped move it, Marcus said. Daniel nodded. Then it was worth telling. Still, he didn't tell Grace. That victory belonged elsewhere. Their lives didn't need it to keep moving. The holidays came and went. Grace decorated the tree. Daniel made her favorite cinnamon rolls from scratch. They spent New Year's Eve on the porch with hot cocoa, counting the fireworks from a distance. At midnight, she yawned and leaned against his side. Do you think next year will be good? He looked out at the quiet street. I think it will be true. That matters more. She nodded, half asleep. I like true. In January, Daniel found himself sitting in a meeting at Grace's school with her teacher and the principal. Not because of a problem, but because of a nomination. Grace had written an essay for a statewide program on resilience. Her piece had been selected. They let him read it in private. My name is Grace, and I live with my dad. We used to have a big house, but now we have a small one that feels bigger because it's peaceful. I learned that peace isn't about space, it's about trust. Some people think strong means loud, but my dad is strong because he's quiet. He listens. He doesn't get shaken. He tells the truth even when it hurts. That's why I feel safe. That's why I laugh again. Daniel had to set the paper down for a moment. When he picked it up again, he smiled. In the months that followed, Grace traveled with him once, to a speaking engagement in Arizona. She helped him organize his notes, practiced questions with him, and sat in the front row. Afterward, a woman in the audience approached. Your daughter is amazing. You two have a rare bond. Daniel nodded. It was forged in a fire, but it held. By the time Grace turned 11, Vanessa was a distant name, not erased, not maligned, just archived. Occasionally a memory floated through, a song in the grocery store, a photo in an old box. Grace would ask, "Is that her?" And Daniel would answer simply, no bitterness, no rewrites. Yes, that was a long time ago. And it stayed there. Daniel started keeping a journal again, not like before, when every entry was strategy and observation. Now it was snapshots. A drawing Grace made, a joke she told, a line she wrote in a poem. He never wrote about the court anymore. Not the hearings, not the recordings, not the moment Vanessa's lawyer had turned white. That chapter was done. What mattered now was how Grace was thriving. She had started writing stories herself. One afternoon, she handed him a folder. Can you read it and tell me if it makes sense? The title read, The Girl Who Grew Taller Than the Storm. He read it all. A story of a girl who used to live under gray clouds, but one day built a ladder and climbed past them, where the sky was wide and her voice was strong. He looked at her, eyes soft. It makes perfect sense. She grinned. Good, because it's not done yet. And neither, Daniel realized, were they. It rained the morning Grace turned 12, a soft, persistent drizzle that turned the street into a mirror and made the leaves drip like clockwork. Daniel woke early, not because of the weather, but because he'd always woken early. Years of discipline didn't unspool just because peace had arrived. He brewed coffee, fed Comet, and stared out the kitchen window as the sky yawned open into a gray mist. Grace padded into the room a few minutes later, barefoot, wearing her favorite hoodie. "Happy birthday," he said, setting a mug of cocoa in front of her. She grinned. "Thanks. Do I look older?" He tilted his head, inspecting her face. "Maybe, but just a little wiser." That day, they kept things simple. Grace didn't ask for a party, just a movie marathon, popcorn, and her favorite pizza. Daniel took the day off and turned off his phone. They built a blanket fort in the living room and let Comet crawl in, his tail wagging through every explosion on screen. She fell asleep near the end of the third film, her head against his arm. He stayed like that until well past midnight, watching the flickering credits reflect across her peaceful face. In the days that followed, she started a new sketchbook. Unlike the last one, which had been filled with branches and figures standing still, this one showed movement, people in motion, trees bending with wind, waves crashing on rocks. When he asked her about it, she simply said, "I feel like things are moving again." Daniel understood. The past had finally stopped chasing them. There were no more court notices, no more hearings, no more mailed envelopes that bristled with old tension. Vanessa had remained gone, silent, true to her final letter, a distant echo that no longer carried weight. Daniel had quietly closed the restitution account and donated the funds to the nonprofit that helped families in crisis. He didn't make an announcement, just signed the check and sent it along with a letter. "Use this for someone who can't afford to wait." Spring rolled in with wildflowers blooming along the edges of their yard. Grace planted a row of sunflowers and painted small rocks to border the garden. She named each flower after someone in her life: classmates, her teacher, Comet. The biggest one, right in the center, she named Daniel. He said nothing when she told him, just gave her a hug and made her favorite grilled cheese that night. At school, she was thriving. Her teachers commented on her leadership, her steadiness, her compassion. One even wrote, "She's the kind of student who makes the room feel safe." Daniel kept that note in the drawer beside her birth certificate. In June, they returned to the northern beach, the same motel, the same rock she had stood on years before. This time, she stood taller, her arms out, face to the wind again. Daniel took the picture. She looked back at him afterward. "Still got it?" He smiled. "Always." They walked along the shore, Comet bounding ahead, seagulls crying above them. Grace picked up a smooth stone and handed it to him. "For the garden," she said. "We'll name a new flower after the trip." That night, back in the motel room, she sat with her sketchbook open across her lap. "Do you ever think about how weird life is?" "Sometimes." "How something can hurt so much but still give you good things later." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's the whole story, I think. Is it okay if I write about it someday?" He nodded. "It's yours to tell." By the time they drove home, the garden had grown thick with green. The sunflower with his name stood tall, tilted toward the sun. Grace placed the beach stone beneath it and wrote "Oceanside" in small letters across its surface. Daniel resumed work, speaking now and then at events for the nonprofit. He rarely talked about Vanessa. He talked about process, about how systems can be wrong but still be changed, about how the most powerful tool anyone has is their composure. One evening, as Grace worked on a new story, she asked him, "Do you think people know you were scared back then?" He looked up from his book. "Probably not, but I was." "Why didn't you show it?" "Because I wanted you to feel safe." She nodded slowly. "You did, even when I didn't know what was happening." The story she wrote that summer was called "The House That Didn't Fall." It was about a father who built a shelter from quiet things, bedtime stories, steady hands, open doors. The house faced storms, but always stood. She read it to her class in the fall. The teacher cried. Daniel framed the final page and hung it near the front door. Years passed. The house changed slowly with time. New paint, more books, a second-hand piano Grace played every afternoon. Daniel never remarried. He never needed to. The life they had built didn't feel like something that needed to be replaced. It felt full. On her high school graduation day, Grace gave him a wrapped box. Inside was a leather journal. On the first page she had written, "You wrote the story that saved us. Now write the one that's just yours." He held it for a long time, and in the quiet of that night, with the window open and the garden humming with summer air, he wrote, "She was the truth I carried through every lie, and in the end, the truth outlasted everything." What did you think of this story and how he handled everything? Would you have made the same choice or walked a different path? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe.